Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Geek Impulse podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Sexton, here with my co-host, Steven, as well. And we have the pleasure of having a good friend of mine, Justin, on, who is probably the most, at least that I know of, but probably, to be quite honest, the most authority when it comes to horror films. I mean, you can see by his backdrop, right? He eats, sleeps horror films. Am I correct?
Oh, definitely. I wake up in the morning and watch a horror movie, usually on most any other day.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So that's why I have you here, because I think this is a good one for, Halloween's coming up, right? Which I think is pretty cool. And I figured there's nobody else better that I know to have on than you. So I figured, maybe for the Geek Impulse people that might be watching us on YouTube, or the ones that will be listening to it on the podcast, maybe if you can just kind of give a quick rundown of, I guess, who you are, where to find you on social media, and then also how this all came about, the passion for horror.
For sure. Well, basically, I'm generally pretty easy to find. I have a Twitter, which is Head of Gore. I'm also on Instagram as JustinHead01. I have a YouTube channel, Slasher Films. And if anything, we can probably put a link somewhere on this or something, and as well as a Vimeo and a website through Wix.com.
Okay.
And then I have a Facebook page for my production company, Slasher Films.
Go.
So I have definitely more than a few ways to be found on social media.
Awesome.
And as far as the passion for horror movies go, and making them as well, it just started in like when I was about 9 years old. I decided I wanted to make movies, and it wasn't until my early teens, like say about 13, 14, that I started to watch horror movies, like a lot of the slasher movies, the original Friday the 13th film series, Halloween movies, and then started to get into a lot of the black and white horror movies. And that's when I started to just develop this love for everything from like the gothic atmosphere in certain horror movies to lots of the gore and the cabin in the woods type settings and such. And it just made me want to explore that and the possibility of making some of those films and just recreating what I love about those types of movies and films and whatnot.
Awesome. So that's good to know. I think that's pretty informative. How about let's get into some of the films that inspired you. I know we kind of talked about some things that you wanted to cover, and I think that's pretty good. Where would you like to start today?
Ooh, and that's that's a loaded question. Well, I guess let's start back with the classics. Just some of the older black and white films from like 30s up until like the early 50s, somewhere around there.
Okay.
Okay. What are some of your favorites?
Well, one of my favorite horror movies of all time is the original Dracula with Bela Lugosi from 1931.
Okay. Is that the one with Todd Browning, I think his name is?
Yeah, he was the director, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's a film that I first saw when I was like 13. It was on Turner Classic Movies, and just the thing that immediately just grabbed me was the gothic ambiance, like these scenes of Dracula in his castle, it's covered in cobwebs, vampires slowly coming out of their coffins with fog swooping in through the scene, and just these push-in shots they would do on the lead actor, Bela Lugosi, with these hypnotic eyes of his, which is something that grabbed me when I first saw that movie. And just the overall slow ambience of the movie that is what really drew me into it when I first saw it.
It kind of sounds like what I got when I first seen like Nosferatu or like a White Zombie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, those are two of some of my favorite classics.
Those are also great ones as well.
Cool.
So,
yeah. So like that with those ones, I mean, I think that a lot of the original films that kind of paved the way. By the way, can everybody hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I was getting a bit of an echo, like a feedback. I think my mic was too close to the speakers, perhaps. All right, but no, I think some of those classics really paved the way. But I feel like a lot of horror films these days have kind of lost, and it might be off topic because we're kind of being chronological in a sense with all these films. But I feel, and maybe you can chime in on that, Justin. But I feel like a lot of the films these days are either just trying to rehash the old stuff, nothing really original, and or just kind of, I don't know, they're not very scary. Like there is I think it was called Veronica, for example. There's this movie, I think it was called Veronica. It takes place in like Spain or something. It was on Netflix. Everybody's saying it was the most scariest movie out there, right? I watched that and I was like, no, I got more scared as a kid watching Dolls than I did.
Right. I mean, is that the movie where they're hunting that like poltergeist in those apartments?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think I took a look at that one as well. And that brings up a point, but I mean, I don't think the whole genre is lost right now. Like, I mean, I haven't seen the new Halloween. We'll get into Halloween in a little bit, but have you seen a Netflix movie called Before I Wake? It's actually a really good one if you haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it myself either. I'm probably one of the few people on the planet Earth that does not have Netflix, actually.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. But
It's worth a watch.
But what I'm saying is that, you've seen the more modern movies, right? So
Oh yeah.
what do you think is the really the big difference between the classics and what's going on now in modern times in 2017, 18, etc., that you feel is it actually progressing on the genre, or is it really regressing back and not really doing anything original, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. It's kind of a bit of both. It's progressing in a way because it is taking us away from what's happening now with a lot of the cheaper horror movies that are even worse than the cheaper horror movies that came out before, because even those had a sense of quality to them. But it's taking us away from the more jump scare heavy movies and such that are coming out and having mass audience of teenagers going to see. But at the same time, there is a bit of that regression happening that isn't really taking us in a new direction. It's taking us to a familiar road that we're all welcoming towards, but at the same time, it's not really saying anything that's giving any lasting power to the future. Like even something like a movie that just came out recently, Hereditary, has
I saw that, yeah.
Yes, it has both of those, where it does go back to sort of the simpler formula of just building on atmosphere, having these mostly subtle scares, but at the same time, it's not really doing anything to really bring its own voice. Basically, it doesn't really have as much to say as something back in the day like the original Night of the Living Dead, or even looking amongst my collection of films, Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
Right, which is another movie they remade a lot of times in the horror genre, correct?
Oh, definitely. Whether it's sequels, reboots, sequels that ignore everything else before it except the first one.
Right.
What do you think about reboots of older films?
That's it. They can be done like anything. They can be done well, and they can be done poorly, in my opinion. Like there's a remake of one of my favorite horror movies of all time, Suspiria, that's coming out next month in November. It looks like it's taking some of the story elements of the original, but at the same time, it's also doing its own thing and kind of creating its own voice. Kind of similar to some other horror movies that have come out previously, like John Carpenter's The Thing is a remake of a 50s horror movie.
I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean
I was just going to say that just did its own thing, basically.
Yeah. Right, but I mean, like, some remakes are good. Like John Carpenter's The Shining is like the classic, right?
Oh yeah, it's
before that. That's the one that's is it Shining or The Thing?
The Thing.
Okay, The Thing. Yeah, isn't that the one that's like looked at as the main one, but it's a remake, correct? Or
it is, yeah. It's considered one of the best.
Right.
You know, it's yeah, for and basically for every good horror remake, there's a few bad ones here and there. Like
Yeah.
some good ones I can think of are, of course, like I said, John Carpenter's The Thing, or the Night of the Living Dead remake was actually from like the early '90s, wasn't that bad either. Um, but then there's other ones like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. I wasn't a fan of, and Rob Zombie's Halloween is.
Yeah.
Nah.
Is that even Halloween? I mean,
Yeah.
it's,
What
it's
was
quite
that?
different, right?
What was that film?
That's that. I don't know where the idea came from for that. That was.
Go ahead and be brutally honest. Be brutally honest about Rob Zombie's Halloween. Go ahead.
Uh, you know what? I'm not gonna lie. As a whole, the movie's a mess. It doesn't work fully, but I do admire Rob Zombie for at least trying something different with the first half of the movie. What I don't like is when the second half becomes, because the first half is like almost like a prequel focusing on Michael Myers as a kid and his origin. The second half literally becomes a retelling of the original movie,
Okay.
but if it was garbage. It was exploitation trash from the 70s.
So, touching on Halloween, and I know we're kind of bouncing everywhere, but touching on Halloween, for example, there's been so many of those films. Who do you think is the better franchise? You have Freddy Krueger, which actually, I hear they're going to be redoing. So you have Freddy Krueger, you have Mike Myers, you have all this stuff. Where do you see this going? Who has the best franchise, do you think? Is that too tough to say?
It's I might have to give it to Halloween, because I love most of all the Friday the 13th movies, but when I look back at them now, it's only the first four movies that I absolutely love all the way through, and the rest of the franchise just has these great moments that I remember.
Gotcha.
And as a kid, I thought, oh, these movies are great. Now when I look at them, I'm like, no, it's just these few moments here and there. Whereas Halloween, I can say I at least have like 5 movies I can count on my hand, or I'm sorry, 6 movies I can count that I actually enjoy, good or bad.
Right, and it isn't Halloween one of the few franchises that actually has its own convention. I was actually there a couple weeks ago at the Halloween convention. It was the 40th. I guess it comes around every 5 years. It was kind of interesting.
That's right, I heard about that. I didn't get a chance to go to that when it was around myself. But, and and in Pasadena, they also had this gallery called Return to Haddonfield that basically had like all these pictures of the Halloween movies and such.
Right.
Yes, but it seems that Halloween has been one of the few that's actually kind of had a lasting impact on pop culture, especially because each one kind of tries to do something different as it goes along. Personally, for me, the only ones that I actually like are Halloween's 1, 2, 4, and H20, and then the newest one.
Oh, so you did see the newest one?
I did. Opening night actually.
Okay, how was that?
I like it. It makes the top. Like if there's 8 movies in the franchise, if I'm remembering correctly, it breaks into the top 3 at least.
Okay, so it's worth a watch then.
Definitely, I'd say 7.5 out of 10. I'd definitely say check it out. It's a lot of fun.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out myself. Like I said, it was nice because I think I actually ran into Jamie Lee Curtis, and there's a few other people actually at the convention. So that was really nice. It was something I didn't even know. I just kind of got thrown into it.
Oh, nice. Was Nick Castle there as well, or?
Yeah, I believe so. I think the only person that wasn't there was John Carpenter. I think he was out in Europe at the time, or the UK, doing something.
Well, I saw an interview, and I'll have to look it up and research it, but wasn't John Carpenter like giving some like kind of upset about remakes right now or something like that? Like, oh, they're remaking one of the films that he did, and they're remaking it, and he's like, I hope they ask me to be on the project because I don't want them to screw it up or something like that.
I think that might be Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah, okay, so that's different. That's not really a horror film.
Different movie, but
Different movie. I thought it was one of the other films he did.
Oh yeah. Well, he did direct that though, so
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
of course. But you know what I mean. So maybe you can define the difference between a thriller and a horror film. And do they intertwine?
They definitely can intertwine. It is possible, especially something like the original Halloween, or even a movie like the original Psycho could definitely be considered a thriller. Because to me, a horror movie can ride that fine line between sticking to reality and keeping things grounded, like the two movies I just mentioned. But they also have that leeway to move into the supernatural, either have a movie that's entirely supernatural, a movie that's entirely grounded in reality, or a movie that kind of rides that fine line between the two. Whereas a thriller, I would say, definitely tends to stick more grounded most of the time, if anything.
Right. I mean, I guess they're similar in the way they make you kind of feel uneasy emotions.
Definitely.
That's the best way that I put it.
And also, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, you can go ahead. It's all good.
No, I was gonna say. I mean, because like the horror genre itself is split up into so many different things. Like slasher films, for example. Or you have your basic horror films. It might even be something as stupid like one of my favorite John Carpenter movies is Vampires.
Oh, nice.
That one. I mean, it's technically a horror film in the way because it deals with that, but I mean, it's different from a Halloween movie.
Definitely, that's one that's been a while since I've seen myself. Like a few years.
Sorry about that. You probably heard a. You probably heard a. Probably, I think it was a Lamborghini or something. So I do apologize because I got the window open.
Oh no worries, it's all good. It's kind of a hot day, but with horror movies, it can be intertwined with most any other genre, just because there are so many subgenres to choose from. So it can intertwine with thrillers, or in the case of vampires, where it's also a little bit of a western and such.
Right.
So there's definitely some jumping around in between in the horror movie genre.
Gotcha.
Okay, and well, I mean, to get back to where we were, I mean, we stopped off after you talked about Dracula. I know we wanted to kind of go chronologically. We haven't done that. But what about some of your other films that kind of transition into what we know as horror films these days? Like you're saying, from the 50s, I guess, on to like the 60s and the 70s.
Oh, yeah. Going right along. One of the last ones I want to touch on the last two I want to touch on from the 30s, there's the original Frankenstein, which I feel like while Dracula definitely got the Gothic thing started, it was really Frankenstein that started to bring in the whole notion of the mad scientist and took the Gothic style even further with things like the long dark shadows that we normally think of with those old black and white horror movies, and bringing people back from the dead and such. And one of the other ones, though, that I feel like also took things even further was a little movie that I like to watch year-round and around Halloween time called Freaks.
Freaks. Okay.
Yeah, is that the one with the twins that are conjoined that are actually in it? I can't remember their name.
Yeah, it's I'm having a hard time myself, but there are conjoined twins in the movie.
Twins or something?
Yeah, there's twins. There's there's a group of dwarf actors that are brother and sister. They were like a singing troupe, and there was the bearded lady. There basically all these people that were actually in sideshow attractions at the time were actually in this movie. And
right.
So those in the movie, those are like actual people that were from the circus?
Yeah,
from the sideshows?
The two girls that I was mentioning, I think their name, I think I have it here. They're Daisy and Violet Hilton.
That's them, yeah.
Yeah, they're actually in the movie, and I watched a documentary on them. It showed their life after the movies and how they kind of lived. They got famous and then fell into obscurity before they passed away. You should watch it. It's pretty interesting.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, the film kind of dealt with people like that were actually in the traveling circus at the time, I guess you could say.
No, definitely. And the director of the movie, who also did Dracula, Todd Browning, had worked in the sideshow and the circus attractions and such. And so he was able to basically make this movie based on his own personal experience. And so, and it's interesting because just for most of the movie, it's this almost like this drama where this one of the dwarves in the movie, Harry Earls, is in love with this tall woman named Cleopatra, who's using him for his money. And when they get married, she poisons him, but he manages to survive, and so he gets together with the other performers. And on this dark, stormy night, when all the wagons just crash in this in the woods, where it's just all wet and messy and thunderstorms and all that, and they attack the tall woman, Cleopatra, and later you see what they did to her. And this is probably one of the earliest movies to show something like this, because they basically deformed her. So they cut off one of her eyes, cut out her tongue, cut out both of her legs, and turned her into this a bird woman. So like when you see her later in her little area, she's squawking, at the audience that's looking down at her. And it's this image that always got to me and never left me, and it made me just fall in love with the movie because of that. And so I feel like that in a way kind of paved the way for later movies in the 70s that, did similar things with like torture and gore and whatnot.
Like, what do you think about House of Wax?
House of Wax is one of my favorite Vincent Price movies of all time. Saw that when I was like about 20, something like that, on Turner Classic Movies. And it's one that does the whole Gothic atmosphere, but in color this time. And it's just, to me, it's one of Vincent Price's best performances, where he's just this madman that owns a wax museum that he's starting to fill back up after it burned down in a fire at the beginning of the movie. It was burned down by his old business partner with him in it. And so now he's starting to fill up the museum with all these dead people encased in wax. And so that's
yeah.
I'm sorry?
No, I was going to say, not to take away from it, but how did you feel about the version with Paris Hilton?
I like it when she dies. Great death scene.
I just had to ask. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. That's really all I have to say about that version. She has a great death scene where she gets like an axe driven through her eye or something like that, and then I know she gets encased in wax later, which it seems that's the only thing that they take away in that remake, is the fact that they encase a lot of these dead people in wax. And
what about the real wax museum is actually wax, correct? It's nothing like they don't put actual dead people in wax. Because there's a wax museum in LA, right?
It's
made all entirely of wax, right?
You never know. I mean, there's only one way to find out. Just take like a sharp tool and just kind of start scraping away, see if anything comes out underneath. Because supposedly, if it's encased in wax, it's going to be preserved for a long time.
Wow. Interesting.
And so, I guess moving along from House of Wax, one horror film that I actually rewatched recently that actually did have quite an impact on me. It's, to me, one of the scariest movies I've actually ever seen. It's called The Haunting.
Wait. You watch horror films with a passion, like all the time, but this movie actually scared you.
It did, actually.
Elaborate. How did this film? Aside from other films, how did this film scare you more than anything else?
For sure. Well, just kind of go briefly into detail about The Haunting. It's a haunted house movie, black and white movie from the 60s, about people staying in this house that has a long history of just horrible tragedies happening. And so these paranormal investigators go into the house, a paranormal investigator and a bunch of volunteers go in to kind of basically examine the house, and all these things start to happen. such as pounding on the door and ghosts bending the door inward. And the thing that actually scared me about the movie was starting out, you start to hear about some of the ways that the people in the house before were driven insane. You know, so there's just like...
No, I was gonna say, before your cat came in, did you see when he was talking about how
the door started opening up?
I was trying not to say anything.
Oh no.
My bad.
No, it's not a big deal. It's just like you're talking about
like, oh my God, behind you.
talking about the haunting.
We're kind of
starts
for a
opening
discussion.
I thought it was turning into a horror film right now.
This cat's not actually here. She's she's a figment of our imagination. But no, it's just it's just how with this movie it really gets into mental illness, and the curses are all kind of attributed to mental illness and how they really affect, at first, the family members that lived in this house before these paranormal investigators. And then from there, you start to see the main character, who's one of the volunteers, start to slowly go insane. And here, I was like, let me get...
Yeah, no worries. Brief intermission.
Yes. Apologies. I'll start back from the top on this. Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, no worries. Just keep going from where you were. It's no big deal.
No worries. But so basically, when we go to the main character, who's one of the volunteers, she slowly starts to become almost one with the house and its family members, its heritage, its curses, and basically she slowly starts to just go insane and come unraveled. And that's the thing that always gets me more than, you know, zombies or vampire, it's becoming unhinged and going insane. It's more internal stuff that really gets to me, the mental side of it.
Is that why Psycho touches so many heartstrings with people?
I would definitely say yes, because someone like Norman Bates, who's seems a little more normal in the beginning of the movie until he starts to talk about his hobbies, such as taxidermy, bird stuffing, and as the movie goes along, you know what you find out about Norman Bates. It kind of feeds into that and the idea of someone who seems so normal that could also be hiding something behind closed doors, like being a homicidal person that dresses up like his mother and kills people.
Yeah. You know, well, see, that's so. With that being said, it's kind of on topic, but have you personally, and maybe this is too personal, but have you personally experienced any kind of unexplained situation in your own personal life that made you potentially even question your own sanity? And did you think that maybe you're watching too many horror films? Or is that even possible?
I wish I had a story for this one, but I don't actually. No, it's I think my mind, after watching all these horror movies, is just so warped that it can barely be touched by anything outside of myself.
Okay.
So it's really something like The Haunting that really just gets to me. That's mostly it.
So, you know, because we're called Geek Impulse, right? So we cover lots of different things that I would say you're definitely a horror geek, or would I be wrong to say that?
Most of no, that's on topic. That's about right.
Right. So.
Oh, we cover fandom. We can say that.
Fandom as well. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that I see as though maybe there is a growing culture within the horror genre that we might not have seen 10 years ago. It really seems like it's starting to grow. Or am I mistaken with that?
No, I wouldn't say you're mistaken. I mean, because there's been things lately that have kind of started to bring horror back into the mainstream, such as, and maybe this is a little more extreme than anything, the show Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Which is one of the few things on Netflix I have seen because I have the Blu-ray set of it. But, you know, which that also brought these nostalgia. kick with it. But at the same time, it is bringing back a lot of these older horror movies. Like, you know, it has a lot in common with Poltergeist and you know, movies like The Thing and such. So, and on top of that, you have shows like Ash versus Evil Dead, based off the Evil Dead movies, that for a while was even more popular than Walking Dead. I heard it actually had higher ratings on the channel it was airing on, Stars, than Walking Dead did at the time that show was airing. Yeah. So I feel like it's definitely slowly starting to have a bit of a resurgence outside of its own fandom and community. Because, and especially the place that I work at in San Clemente, I've talked to more than enough people that have seen and go to see horror movies, good or bad. You know, I know a whole warehouse of people that went to see The Nun, which I didn't see myself, but
well,
I think
for me,
definitely shows the outgrowth.
Yeah, so there's definitely exceptions, I think, but one of my theories is that the reason why I feel like it's also getting more popular is because, and I don't want to get like too deep into it, but I feel like there is a lot of mental illness right now within society, in America at least, where you know, this is definitely an issue, and people are turning to horror films because they can almost relate. This is funny.
Sadly, right?
Yeah,
definitely. I would actually kind of agree with that in a way, because my own personal experience, I've found that there's been some horror movies that maybe not in the extreme level that they mean, but something like The Shining, Jack Nicholson, you know, bouncing a tennis ball off the walls. I remember watching that when I was having some very intense writer's block, and that's what Jack Nicholson is going through at the time in that movie. So it was kind of one of those things that I realized when I was watching. I was like, you know, maybe not quite to the extent that Jack Nicholson would do later in the movie, chasing his family around with an axe, but for that period of time in the movie, I feel what Jack Nicholson is going through with the writer's block and just having no motivation to come up with anything. And I guess if I can give another example, you know, it's just with like the new Halloween breaking box office records, you know, recently. So there's definitely something there with people looking for that escape.
Right. I mean, to tie it into like the mental health. I mean, he was searching for the girl that he was going to kill next, is because he liked the softness of a woman's voice, correct? And it kind of reminded him when he seen her interact with her brother that kind of what he did, correct? Isn't that kind of why he was chasing her for so long? That's kind of a mental health thing. I mean, he had mental health issues.
Oh, and I'm sorry, which one? I didn't.
In Halloween.
Oh, in Halloween.
Yeah. Mike Myers.
Yeah. No, I think it was more just it was that and the obsession of just killing off everybody in that bloodline and such.
Well, right.
Yeah, it's.
So what do you? Why don't you, you know, because I have you here, I want people to get to, you know, you're already building quite the rapport within the film industry, especially with regards to horror. So why don't you tell us, you know, some of your, I've watched your stuff, I like it, obviously. And so why don't you tell us more about the work you're doing right now, some of the stuff you've done, what you've learned, maybe even if you could give some advice to aspiring filmmakers of horror, or any filmmaker for that matter, some advice as far as what to do, and yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. So, well, yeah, just to give a brief kind of outlining of the films I've done as of late, for years, I'm doing horror movies for the last 10 years, or actually a little over now, and they've been in different genres, but I feel like my current output has been more focused towards kind of paying homage to the stuff that came in the past, like 80s horror movies, 70s horror movies, and before that, while also each one of my films has had kind of a satirical side to it, kind of social commentary angle, such as one of my films, Renaissance, about a fashion model going insane and having these hallucinations that her skin is falling apart. That was a film that I made as a tribute to 80s horror movies, particularly movies like The Fly with Jeff Goldblum.
Oh, yeah, everybody loves The Fly. My fiance loves The Fly. She loves Jeff Goldblum.
It's a classic. I rewatched it recently. It's amazing, and but it's also exploring, the horrors of the fashion industry, which I had read some stuff about it before making the film, and basically in terms of the whole social commentary, it feeds into that, as well as the fear of age with this character whose skin's falling apart, which is basically kind of similar to aging, which is sort of a way of kind of becoming decrepit and disintegration and such. And so there's been that film, as well as another film I made after that called I Laugh on the Outside, which was a slasher movie, and that focused on an actress who goes after the film production company that ruined her life. And so that kind of taps into something that myself and a few friends of mine were going through at the time, that we were all having. There was a brief time when I was trying to get into acting as kind of a way to bring in funds to make my films.
Gotcha.
As well as a few other acting friends of mine. So it was kind of that feeling of having that outlet, wanting to go into that career, but then always getting shut down and not being able to make it work. So that kind of fed into that film, and so that's where kind of the slasher angle comes in, of this person chopping through this production company that she used to work with. And even my most recent film that I'm working on, called Queen of the Dead, harkens back to the 1930s horror movies. It's in black and white, and it's a little more gothic than what I've done before. And it's about an author who is basically looking to commit suicide after her most recent book failed to make any sales. But then she starts to notice these people following her, and finds that she's being followed around by this crazy cult of Halloween mask-wearing people who worship her as if she's a goddess.
Wow.
And so with that's been my output over the last few years. It's just these very social commentary heavy movies, which what got me into that was the work of George Romero with like Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, which one was about racism and the other one basically the race issues of the 60s, and then Dawn of the Dead was more about the consumerist side of what was going on in the 70s with shopping malls, because that movie takes place in a shopping mall.
Yeah.
And so it was stuff like that that kind of got me to want to do horror movies that harken back to that older stuff, while also having a slight bit of a message to it.
Because are you finding it hard to really break into the industry? Because I mean, it's a good old boys club in a sense. You got to know somebody. It's about who you know. I mean, are you having? What challenges are you facing? Are you seeing from the film industry, or have you not seen them? Are you actually being very well welcomed very well into the industry?
Yeah, it's how would I put it? As far as, I would say that there is some resistance in terms of the film industry, because having sent my film work to like festivals, or even like say a website for a big studio, then they might allow you to send one of your films in to show it to them. There has been some of that resistance, because it is a lot of who you know that can get you, and that can kind of get your name out there and such. And I graduated from my film school about 3 years ago. So since then, it's been a bit of a tough road to get up there and kind of break into the studio system, or even the independent film system, which there are studios that produce independent films and such. So there has been that resistance, and that's where what I've just maintained is to just keep doing what I do and just keep making stuff and putting it out there for people to see, and just try to get my name out there, and that's
get that awareness. So have you? Because I know you put video, you do put some of your films on YouTube, correct? If I'm not mistaken, because that's where I've watched them, is on YouTube.
That is where I put them. Yeah.
Yeah. So, have you thought about potentially making like maybe a mini series, like a mini horror series, where you can produce several? Maybe you're already doing this, and I don't realize it, but like several videos, almost like a YouTube series type of thing, where you could put out consistent content like once a week, something like that, to where maybe it'll garner even more recognition.
I have actually, I have thought about that actually. There was, going back to when I graduated from my film school, there was the notion of doing a web series, kind of along the lines of a web version of Tales from the Crypt, or even going back even further, Tales from the Dark Side, an 80s series that was kind of along the same lines, or even the Twilight Zone. And so it was this idea of doing just a bunch of anthology stories that each episode was a new story. And it was just, I had written the first episode, but it was kind of getting to coming up with at least the next couple, which would set kind of the formula and the format for the series, so that I could send it to other friends of mine to possibly get in on and kind of go, okay, so this is how he's kind of got it set up, so we'll fit that into that bracket, our story, whatever it is. And I just haven't had a chance to really go back to it because I've been so focused on making the films I've been making at the moment.
Gotcha.
But I keep going back to it, though. And I guess also going back to what you asked earlier about advice for young filmmakers, I guess in a way I almost kind of answered this, but I would say definitely if you have the means or the drive to, make films, regardless of whether you can or can't get into, the system, definitely, just keep pushing your work out, keep doing what you do, because eventually somewhere along the line, that can definitely be used as a calling card. Maybe not right away, but I feel like eventually it'll add up to something that can help you get your foot in the door.
And this is kind of off topic, but it's still on topic, I think. Have you ever watched anime at all?
I've seen it a few here and there, yeah.
So they have a horror genre of anime. Like there's one called Lied, or people say Lied. I don't know, something. The way they pronounce Lied, it varies from fandom to fandom. But it's called Elfen, Elfen, Lied. You can find episodes on YouTube. It's pretty gory. Right.
I'll have to check that one out. Actually, I haven't heard about that one.
I would say, obviously, a lot of big studios are trying to cash in on the anime stuff, right? So I'm not saying like, hey, maybe this would be a suggestion where you copy them, but I'm saying, or make one like a live action. I'm saying, for example, maybe you can garner some inspiration, because one thing that I like, because our company Geek Impulse, we're here. Eventually, we'll be moving. We'll keep a flagship company here, but we'll move headquarters to Japan, which is what I'm in the process of doing right now. It could take another year. If it at the latest, it could take until after the Olympics. However, what I find is that the Japanese, when it comes to their manga and anime, even when it's horror, they're pretty unique in their storytelling. They really seem to be very almost. I mean, there are some that take from others and don't really aren't really original, but there are a lot of original stuff that I think maybe you might be able to garner some inspiration from, and be actually able to take some of those elements and maybe even put it in to one of your films, which I don't know, thought would probably be a good idea.
Most definitely, and it's definitely something that I need to look into more, because that's not to say there haven't been some anime that have had some potential for inspiration, or even the biggest one I would have to say is, which is like the granddaddy of them all, is Akira,
Yeah, Akira. Yeah.
which I recently rewatched at this theater in downtown Santa Ana, the Frida Cinema,
Okay.
and it's just an amazing movie with the images and the distortion of the main character, or the secondary character, actually the secondary character's body, just when it morphs with different machine parts, or even just like the bits of his arm that just like string out and start to join to other machine parts. And even the biggest thing, when he like at the end turns into this just giant blob that's about to explode, it has these amazing images that just stick with you. It's truly an amazing flick.
Gotcha. See, I think you had something you wanted to say, Steven?
No, you're good.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, what because I know we probably didn't get into everything, and I would like to, but it is kind of getting late. I don't want to keep you too much longer. So maybe to wrap up this podcast, is there any kind of maybe Easter eggs from films that you want to tell people about that they might not know? Any kind of other things you want to talk about real quick before we, get towards the end of the podcast? I'll leave that up to you. What do you think?
I would say I can definitely make some quick little recommendations for stuff to see that's come out like in the last few years that I've seen.
Okay.
Like, honestly, it's been since 2015 that I've started to notice a resurgence in the horror genre that, at least for films worth watching of varying qualities, something like Crimson Peak from Guillermo del Toro was something that really caught me by surprise when I saw it, because, again, jump scare horror movies at the time that were coming out, and that a gothic horror movie like that really just took me back to what was coming out before, and it just had this level of quality that I just loved. And another movie I would recommend is this film called The Witch, which that makes actually my top 5 of the scariest movies of all time, actually, for me. Yeah, there's only 5 movies that have actually done that.
So what are the 5 movies?
The 5 movies would be, number 1 is The Haunting, as I mentioned before. 2 would be The Witch. It's another movie that just gets under my skin, both for the sort of depiction of mental illness, as well as this setting in the woods where these witches are torturing this family, not even by getting too close to them, but just like doing things to them, cursing them, kidnapping relative, like kidnapping the youngest member of the family, this baby, and eating it. And so it's a very creepy, unsettling movie that got under my skin when I saw it in theaters 3 years ago and still does to this day. The other 3 would be this movie called The Innocents, this British horror movie from the 60s that we're going along on the same lines with mental illness, but basically it's another mentally ill character who's seeing these things in a house, and she starts to suspect that these 2 children that she's basically the governess for, she's taking care of them and educating them, are evil, and that they have like they're basically possessed by this ghost of this older man that used to watch over the place. Number 4 would be The Omen.
The Omen.
With the little kid Damien. That's
a really good one. I really like
Yeah,
that one.
it's a really good movie.
It's one of my favorites as well. It's one that actually still gets me by surprise, like when the woman jumps off the jumps off the roof and hangs herself. Because it's the kind of movie that I'm always telling myself, for some reason, she's not going to do it. She's not going to do it. And this is after I've seen it multiple times.
Every time you're like, she's not going to do it.
And then when she does, it's like, oh shit. So it's the kind of movie that it gets me every time. I don't know what it is about it. There's just a creepy atmosphere to it, which wraps us up with number 5, which is the ultimate in creepy atmosphere. It's, believe it or not, the original Alien.
Oh wow.
Okay.
Like with that movie, it's just the atmosphere of this spaceship with the very like creepy architecture, and especially when they get onto the planet where the alien eggs are. Like it's both an amazing movie to look at and just disturbing to look at the same time. And it's disturbing to have this thing that can get inside you and just, pop out. And it's, it basically takes the notion of, female pregnancy and puts it on everybody. Anybody can give birth to this thing, basically. And it's a disturbing idea. But the biggest thing is it's a haunted house movie where, as opposed to other movies where you're constantly telling people to get out of the house, you can't just get out of the house because this is a ship in space.
You're stuck. You're not getting out of that.
No, definitely. And the last thing I want to say about Alien, though, is the scene that gets me every single time is this scene with one of the characters going down an elevator shaft looking for the xenomorph. And as he's going down, each shaft lights the flamethrower and blows it down the hallways. And on the other side of it, his crew members are all looking on this little reader to see where the xenomorph is coming. And when the thing starts to beep and you see it getting closer, you're just getting this sense of like, it can come on at any moment. And finally, when he takes, he pulls out this flashlight and turns it towards camera and then turns it the other way, away from camera, you see the xenomorph pop out, and that's a scene that always just gets me very tense every time I watch the movie.
It's kind of got like a similar feel to like the Body Snatchers, right? But this actually has something like you're giving birth to it coming out of you. I think that's pretty creepy. I don't know if there's all kinds of, I don't want to get into aliens, but there's all different kinds of aliens. I'm sure if they do exist, where something like that would be, but you'd always think that maybe they're a bit more omnipotent, right? But then again,
most definitely. And in movies we've seen all different kinds, take different shapes, do different things between Alien, the Thing, or Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So it's this interesting presence that can be portrayed in any way and can take a different kind of terror in each film that it's in, basically.
Gotcha. All right, man. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. I appreciate you for being on the podcast. We're definitely going to have to do this again. I don't think we dove into everything we wanted to talk about, but I do appreciate you coming on here. And with that being said, one more time, let people know where to find you so that they can, get in touch.
Most definitely. Yeah, you can, like I said, you can either check me out at Head of Gore on Twitter. You can also find me on Instagram, JustinHead01. I have a Slasher Films Facebook page. It's specifically called Slasher Films, and in parentheses, it's SLSHR6, which is basically a mock channel, the station name for that as well. Gotcha. And the last place is on YouTube. If you look up either Slasher Films or type in Slasher Films in my name, or specifically JHead SF06, you'll be able to find the channel, no problem. Cool.